As we look to form gospel saturation hubs in cities and regions, we realize not all of them are going to look the same. They're going to have different starting points, different processes, and even different expressions of a gospel saturation hub where they are. However, we have discerned a pattern that I want to share with you that may already be happening in your city. But before I do that, I want to make sure we're really clear. The most important thing is that Jesus is at the center. There are things called bounded sets and centered sets. Bounded sets is like who's in and how do we know. Centered set is like what's at the center of this that draws all people to it. And so we want to make sure we're not unifying around an event. We're not unifying around a strategy. We're not even unifying around one key idea. We are all about Jesus. This is all for His glory. This is all for His purposes. We want people in every city to be transformed by Jesus Christ. We want cities and regions to be saturated with the good news of Jesus. And when leaders and churches are committing together to collaborate in such a way that they own the lostness of the city so that every man, woman, and child might have an opportunity to meet Jesus through the church, to hear about Jesus, to see the love of Jesus as the church is serving the city, we know God's going to draw more and more people to Jesus Christ. Jesus Himself said, "If I am lifted up, I will draw all people to me." And we know that ultimately is talking about the cross. But we are His body. He is the head. And as we together, through our words and our actions, collaborate around lifting Jesus up, we're confident God will draw more and more people in our cities, our regions, to Jesus Christ. So every hub vision needs to have the center set value that this is all about making much of Jesus, so that people from all backgrounds, cultures, and beliefs will get to benefit from the work that we're bringing. Even if they don't agree with us, they'll still be blessed by Jesus' presence in our work. Now, from that center, we've observed several hubs finding their starting points in one of the 5 components that I've shared previously. Now, if you think of a saturation hub, kind of like an ancient city with gates, then all 5 of the components are almost like city gates. They provide for us a potential entry point in which we can begin to work towards Jesus-centered saturation of a city. Now, here's the process we've discerned so far. You'll see a group of leaders and churches committing to a key initiative around one of the 5 components. Then they'll begin to develop shared outcomes that they're working on together and actually measure. As they do that, that leads to collaborative partnerships. And the more they do that, they eventually form a more formal team that owns a strategic plan to see the region saturated with Jesus' presence and power through His people. Then, as they work more and more on those key initiatives and collaborative efforts and begin to work more and more as a team, they start to realize they need the other components as well, and they begin to build out a much fuller vision for gospel saturation. Now, first, a key initiative. That begins when something moves from an event or a one-off type of experience to an ongoing activity. For instance, several years ago in Phoenix, a group of leaders realized they would be better off training people together versus all of them doing their own training. And it was an initiative, it was an event that they started. They started to do it, but it led to an ongoing collaborative partnership by which they've trained thousands of leaders in their city together in gospel-centered missional living and vocation being an act of worship. And it's been a remarkable work, and it's formed a collaborative partnership and now a local leadership team. So it starts with a key initiative that then begins to identify what's the shared outcome we're after. We saw that happen in Buffalo, New York. In Buffalo, back in 2008, a group of leaders and pastors from about 10 churches said, what if we committed together around church planting, that's the key initiative, and a shared outcome, that is, we want to see one church planted per 50,000 people in Buffalo, New York, where there isn't a gospel presence. So for 10 years, they collaborated on this. They built partnerships around it. They built a team to support it. And what was amazing, even though Buffalo, New York itself decreased by 1% in population, the church collectively grew by 22% in 10 years. That's what it looks like when we start to collaborate around one key initiative with common outcomes, collaborative leadership that's led by a team that's committed over time to make it happen. Now, the third part is collaborative partnerships. Like Phoenix, like Buffalo, they realized they couldn't do this unless they started putting resource toward it, energy toward it, staffing toward it. And so in Buffalo, every one of the 10 churches said, we're all going to take responsibility to give, either money. Some of them gave staff. I know one pastor leads a small church, and a bigger church was funding a lot of it, but he was a great shepherd. He loved developing leaders. And so he poured into these church planters over these 10 years and just made sure they're healthy and they're cared for and they're not alone. And then others gave their people to see it happen. So they collaborated around sharing the ownership of the key outcome. And this all led in Buffalo as well as in Phoenix, here in Seattle, and also in places like Charleston and Montreal to a partnership, a local leadership team that now together is owning the lostness of the region and collaborating by bringing churches more and more together to see gospel saturation happen. That's what happened here in the Puget Sound. Our key initiative that started the whole thing really was prayer. Years ago, way back in, I think 1989, there was a movement of pastors to begin to come together in prayer. It was a prayer summit, and they would pray regularly. They'd go away for 2 or 3 days and pray 24 hours for several days in a row, just seeking God for the region. Well, I know that collaborative work around prayer really laid the foundation for what I'm getting to be a beneficiary of today. And that is, we have seen people cry out together for God to move in this place. But over time, we realized we can't just pray. We got to do more than that. And we had someone come into our city and cast this vision for John 17, one church on mission together. And the pastors and leaders were really cut to the heart. They realized we had been living for our own ego and our own logo instead of Jesus being the ego and the kingdom of God being the logo. And what that led to is a group of us saying, what if we started to meet together, pray together, and say, God, what would you have us do together? Well, what began as a prayer movement and what began as a collection of pastors meeting together over meals led to learning communities where we said, let's get together regularly in regions to make sure every pastor is getting cared for so they're healthy, is honestly sharing where they're struggling, and is working together to learn how to be a better leader who can lead a disciple-making church where they're presently at. We've been doing that for a few years now. We have about 100 churches, about 140 leaders in 10 different learning cohorts, learning together towards gospel saturation. So we've seen prayer being one of the initiatives, healthy leaders being another initiative, disciple-making strategies being a third initiative. We are definitely still waiting on God, what are you going to do in terms of raising up more churches? We haven't planted a lot of churches together yet. That's where we're at. But we have seen citywide collaboration to love our city. In fact, one of my favorite stories is this guy named Matt Rourke. He's a high school teacher. He's part of one of these churches that's in the cohort. He got the vision from his pastor. What if you could be a part of gospel saturation where you live, where you work, where you learn, where you play? And for him, work and learn became the same thing because he's a teacher. And he said, man, what if I could just care for people that way? Well, then COVID happened. And so he shifted to where he lives. And he said, I'm going to care for my apartment complex. I'm going to knock on doors, see who needs prayer, see who needs food. And what that led to was a movement of people giving food to care for those who are hungry, who are not able to get the resources they need because they lost their jobs. And as of now, he's given over 20 million pounds of food, not just him, but the church in Kent to bless the people in that city. And the city has taken notice. The church is here and they're a good presence. The mayor is now asking them to pray for the city, that the city would experience God's kindness and grace. There's a lot of different ways that these will be formed. You might be right now looking at your city going, man, I don't know if there's anything going on. Well, just stop and ask, are any one of those 5 components already getting traction? Are you starting to pray together? Maybe that's where it begins. Or you're serving. These opportunities that we've had recently have provided lots of opportunities to serve together. Maybe you realize, man, I can't train as well as the pastor down the street on this content. I'm going to ask for help. I remember I had one pastor say, I don't even know where to begin. I'm such a small church. What am I going to bring? And I stopped and said, you're thinking about this all wrong. Instead of you thinking what you're going to bring, maybe you should ask, what do I need? Starting in a posture of humility and saying, how might the church serve our little church? How might the Big C church help us get stronger, healthier, and more effective? I'm not sure where you're at in your journey, but our desire is to inspire you with stories, to eventually provide more and more equipping so you can learn how to step in this kind of reality and build a strategy for your city. And then as we do that, we want to see you get more invested in seeing gospel saturation in your area, and we want to join you in investing our time and our resources to support you.